So the other day, my daughter Josie came home from school, and she was grumpy, miserable, discontented. Apparently, some mean girl had been bothering her all day at school. I have to admit, she's my third, so I'm not always that sympathetic anymore. I may have said something like, oh, "Get over it, honey. There's going to be mean girls for the rest of your life." But I didn't have the heart to tell her that the worst mean girl wouldn't be Stella from her class. It would be the mean girl that she created for herself inside. I remember being that age. I remember hearing my mean girl voice. There was a time I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and I was wearing this amazing light blue denim pinstriped miniskirt and these incredible white, fake leather, tasseled cowboy boots. There may or may not have also been a sketchy boyfriend in a black Trans Am involved, but we'll just pretend that didn't happen because my mom still doesn't know about that. Anyway, I was standing there, and I looked down at my legs, and I heard that voice. "Your legs are disgusting. They're so fat. They look like tree trunks. You should never wear anything like that." It didn't matter what sketchy boyfriend said next, because I had heard that voice, and it sounded like the truth. So I ditched the miniskirts and the fake leather boots, and thank God ditched the sketchy boyfriend. But I never ditched that mean girl voice. I even named her. I call her Alice. And Alice has been with me since. She was there on my first day of medical school, sitting in that big auditorium, those steep chairs, and I looked around at these amazing people who would become my colleagues, and I heard Alice. "You don't belong here. You're not smart enough. They admitted you by mistake. And your feet are disgusting. And you were the last person admitted to this class." I mean, the last two were actually true. I don't know how, but I traipsed through a field of poison ivy 2 days before class started. Yeah. And I probably was the last person admitted to Penn that year. I got in off the waiting list the day before class started. Alice was there when I became a department chair. I remember sitting around that long boardroom table, surrounded by all these amazing people. And I heard Alice, "You don't belong here. You're not experienced enough to be a chair. You're too young to be at this table." Over the years, Alice got louder, she got meaner, and she got sneakier. And that's what really worries me for the next generation of leaders, especially women leaders. Do you recognize Alice's voice for yourself? Or maybe you hear it in your spouse or a colleague, or maybe it's your daughter. So here's the thing. I think Alice is holding women back. I think Alice is contributing to the gender leadership gap. And by that, I mean the fact we don't have enough women in leadership. Alice is contributing to that. Now, let me start, before I go there, by telling you some other things that people blame the gender leadership gap on. I call them false narratives, but they actually have grains of truth in them. So for today, I'll call them partial truths. Partial truth number one, we have a pipeline problem, meaning we don't have enough qualified women ready to step into leadership roles. Now, in medicine, we lose 10% of women at every academic level of promotion. At the department chair level where I sit, nationally, there are only 2 women for every 8 men in leadership. And some specialties, it's even lower, maybe as low as 5%. But here's what you need to know. For at least the last 20 years, we've been admitting about equal numbers of women and men into medical school. That's 2 decades. So the numbers just don't support a pipeline problem anymore. The second partial truth is that we have a leaky pipeline, meaning women are leaving medicine. They're pursuing other options, leaving to start families. For this to explain the gender leadership gap, though, we would have to have lost 3 women for every 2 women we see in leadership. This isn't my experience. The last false narrative or partial truth is the one I have the most personal conflict with, and that is that it's a society problem. And that's because we actually do have a society problem. There is real gender discrimination. At the national level in medicine, women physicians make about 75% of what men physicians make. We have real issues in gender-biased evaluations, in gender-biased job advertisements, gender-biased performance reviews, and even gender bias in patient satisfaction scores. But I'm convinced that if we took away all the overt and covert gender discrimination in the world, we would still have a gender leadership gap. And the reason why is that it's not just a society problem, it's also an inside problem. It's an Alice problem. It's a problem that's wrapped up in this concept of imposter syndrome. I love metaphors, and I'm a pathologist, so I'm very sorry, but you're stuck with a medical metaphor. Now, bear with me for just a minute. I'm going to talk about a different pipeline, a really important pipeline. That is the pipeline, the blood vessels that carry your red cells through your body and deliver oxygen to your organs. Normal red cells are squishy, and they can transform their shape in order to fit into tiny, tiny little blood vessels. When they meet up with stress or turbulence, they just bend and transform and then bounce back on the other side. In sickle cell disease, patients have a single DNA mutation. Their red cells look normal on the outside, but when they meet up with stress or turbulence, they bend and they transform into brittle and fragile cells that don't bounce back. These abnormally shaped cells stick to the walls of that pipeline, to that blood vessel. They clog it up, while other normal-appearing cells fly by at 500 miles per hour. Let me bring the metaphor alive for you. In imposter syndrome, we look totally normal on the outside. But when we meet up with stress or turbulence, we transform, become brittle and fragile, and we don't bounce back. And it's because of Alice. She's sitting there telling us of doom and disaster, embarrassment, failure. And when we hear those familiar, believable lies, we reach out and instinctively grab onto the walls of that pipeline and stop. Stuck there on the walls, we're overlooked, unnoticed, passed by others who are unencumbered, who are flying by at 500 miles per hour. We don't have a pipeline problem. We have a flow problem. Women enter into the pipeline, they stay in the pipeline, but with imposter syndrome, they get stuck in the pipeline. Now, I've thrown this term around a couple of times, imposter syndrome. It wasn't always called that. It started out as imposter phenomenon in the 1970s. I don't know how we got syndrome. It's not a medical condition of any kind. I actually prefer, I would like to call it instead, self-underappreciation syndrome. Self-underappreciation syndrome doesn't just affect women either. It affects men too. And it exists on a spectrum. At one end over here is self-underappreciation. On the other end, self-overappreciation. You might know them under different names. Narcissist, egotistical, arrogant, maybe something worse. They're not hard to find. They're not hard to spot. You've seen them everywhere. You've all met them. Imposter syndrome, it's hidden. You won't even know when somebody is not appreciating their own skills and talents. You won't even know if they live in constant fear of being discovered as a fake or a fraud. You'll never know that they don't get satisfaction and joy from their own successes. It's hidden. I teach a class to women with imposter syndrome. And they always ask me, how's somebody going to know I have imposter syndrome? And I say, it's easy to spot someone with imposter syndrome. Just look around you. 7 out of 10 women, high-achieving, successful women, have self-underappreciation phenomenon. It's not just women, it's men too. 5 out of 10 men have self-underappreciation syndrome. That's 50%. So in this class that I teach, this course, it's for women physicians who are overcoming imposter syndrome. There's a lot of people, 70%. In this class, it's filled with amazing women, high-achieving, incredible people at the top of their career. In the first 2 weeks of the program, I asked them to do something really, really hard. I asked them to write out and share with the group on a screen their imposter syndrome inner critic thoughts. Let me share a few of their words with you. You have absolutely no talent. Daycare is raising your kids. You've wasted your career. Give up. This is too hard. I can't believe how stupid you are. Now, if that wasn't hard enough, I asked them to do something even harder. I asked them to take out a picture of a child that they love. Maybe themselves as a small kid, maybe one of their own children, a niece or a nephew. And I asked them to speak their inner critic words out loud while talking to the picture of that child. Listen to the words describing their experience.
To feel this way about me, I'm so harsh. So I actually had to stop because I was going to cry.
Almost like, how did I get to this place?
I've got pictures of my 2 daughters when they were 5. And I started crying on the first one.
When I said those things to my daughter, we spend so much time, I want to build her up to be a strong, confident, amazing woman, and I'm seeing this picture of her in her dress, a Renaissance dress. And it just felt so terrible and so wrong. And it just felt really destructive. Like it was anathema to everything that I've tried to do for her.
I could just envision, I was looking at a picture of my son and just his face crumpling at those words coming out of my mouth.
I have a picture of myself when I was about 5, and I have this huge smile on my face. And I just felt like I was like breaking this little girl's spirit, this just innocent, beautiful little girl. And I was just kind of crushing her with these words.
Breaking that little girl's spirit, crushing her with those words. So whenever I teach a course like that, or I give a lecture or a keynote, somebody always asks me, yeah, but you're a department chair. You were chief of staff. You are an elected member of the College of American Pathologists board. You couldn't possibly have imposter syndrome. And yet, Alice speaks to me every single day. Now, I've learned to kick her out of the driver's seat. She's still a horrible backseat driver, though. So I have other strategies for muffling her voice. I named her. I make her speak out loud instead of in whispers. And I argue with her. I fight with her. I challenge her. And sometimes I tell her to shut the hell up. If I could leave you with anything today, it would be this. Who's your Alice, or your Alex, or your Bernice, or your Barry? What is your Alice keeping you from doing? And think about this. Maybe you can't kick Alice out of your car, but how fast and how far could you go if you just stuffed her in the trunk? Thank you.